Hi, and welcome to ADAC Answers, an education podcast for all. I'm your host, Erin Black. ADAC specializes in providing to private school leaders and teachers customized professional development programs to assist their schools with meeting individual student learning needs and increasing overall student achievement. Led and staffed by passionate, committed professionals, ADAC prides itself on delivering to its clients and the students and families whom its clients serve precise solutions to their unique education challenges. ADAC stands for Accountability, Delivery, Access, and Community, 4 words we believe epitomize our work. We hope you enjoy today's episode and join us in listening to future episodes discussing all things education. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today on another episode of ADAC Answers. Today, we will be talking about student behavior and social emotional well-being. Today, we have the incredible opportunity to speak with 2 ADAC adjunct consultants, Diana Schlosser and Dr. Chris Cipriano. Thank you both for being here with us today. If you guys could each take a moment and introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I am Diana Schlosser. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner and a school mental health consultant over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe 7 at this point. I'm kind of losing track. But I really specialize in helping schools and organizations to really hone in on children's mental health, especially through a family-driven lens, and figuring out the different ways that organizations and schools can really meet the needs while also helping everyone to be as healthy and happy as possible. So,
thank you for your introduction, Diana. Chris, would you please take a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me, Erin. Nice to be with everybody. My name is Chris Cipriano. I'm the principal of Notre Dame High School in Fairfield, Connecticut. I have been in education for 25 years, my entire career actually right here at Notre Dame. And I'm finishing my 13th year as principal of the school. And just a year ago, I finished my doctoral program, which was focused in social and emotional learning. So it's good to be with you.
It is great to be with both of you today. Chris, can you speak to what types of student behaviors educators are seeing in schools?
Yeah, sure. Without question, the world after the pandemic has certainly played an impact in what we're seeing in the classroom. And we're seeing more and more students struggling with anxiety, more and more students who are having trouble focusing in the classrooms. They're having trouble keeping up with their workload. Absences have gone up since COVID, and the overall struggles that our kids are facing it's really impacting their ability to learn in the classroom. So the behaviors have certainly become more prevalent in the world of the social and the emotional struggles of our kids.
Yes, definitely. Is that consistent with what you're seeing, Diana?
absolutely. I would even say pre-COVID, we were seeing increased numbers of anxiety and depression, and COVID seemed to really kind of catalyze that and make it much more prominent. Just across the board, we're seeing anxiety and depression. They tend to go hand in hand in a lot of cases, but we're seeing a lot of that in the school environment, which, makes a lot of sense. In COVID, we were dealing with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of stress. And even from a biological standpoint, that really wreaks a lot of havoc on us and changes the way that we're able to respond to the world around us. And so, we're seeing increased mental health challenges in our students. And I would also say in the adults around the students as well, right?
Yes.
And so a lot of times we're seeing that trickle down effect in the school environment. And so the approach really, from my standpoint, really has to be pretty holistic when we're talking about how we are addressing the mental health challenges in our students, not just thinking about the students themselves, but then also the broader community around them, including the adults. Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree. And that actually is a perfect segue into my second question. How can educators and leaders effectively address these behaviors that you guys are seeing?
From my perspective, in a school building each day, our teachers need to recognize that this is the reality of education today. So many of our veteran teachers, education has evolved so much in the past 20 years. It's evolved so much in the past 5 years. And it's recognizing that this is the reality of being an educator today. And we need to embrace the reality that we need to support our students more than we had to in the past. And we need to be comfortable bringing in some tools in our tool belt that's going to address the social and the emotional needs of our kids. And it's a heavy lift for folks. It is certainly not easy to be an educator in 2023. There's a lot more than just teaching the content area, which for many years was what teachers had to worry about. But now we need to recognize that it's important to address the social and the emotional piece as well. And that's not easy for everybody to do. So we need to make sure that we're giving our teachers the development and the skills and the resources that they need to be successful to tackle that in the classroom. And we also need to know that there's going to be outside professionals that need to play a role in our students' lives and our student learning as well. And that's again, it's a mind shift that needs to happen, because it wasn't the norm 15, 20 years ago. At least it wasn't talked about a lot 15, 20 years ago.
Yes, I would echo a lot of what Chris said. I think also just thinking about it, one of the things you said was that it's a heavy lift, and that is so true. And so I've been really encouraging schools and school communities to think about how to make it a little bit of a lighter lift, right? And that is through, like you said, Chris, those strategic partnerships, right? We might need the help of professionals, bringing in the families and getting their support too, right? I know that in and of itself can be a challenge, but I think oftentimes, and as is the case with mental health, just kind of across the board in our country and in our culture, it's oftentimes dealt with in a very siloed fashion, right? A very isolated type of way. Right. So we're focusing in on those kiddos who may have those intense needs, and we're doing it in a very siloed fashion versus thinking about it at SEL and mental health as a community, a social challenge that we all have to rise to the occasion to meet. And so thinking about it from that standpoint, I think can really help to alleviate some of that anxiety that teachers are feeling when it feels like I alone have to kind of figure out how to support this kiddo in the classroom, right? Instead, if we think, if we leverage the resource of community partners or family members and even the students themselves, right? So this past year, we worked with some schools who created social emotional learning task forces that were multidisciplinary. So there were educators as part of that, but then there were also students and families. And together they kind of tackled, the challenges that the school community were facing in a multi-pronged approach. And so I think more and more, if we start to look at it from that perspective, it'll feel less heavy. And it also, I think it also is really helpful to help eliminate some of the stigma that surrounds mental health, which, I think COVID has helped to alleviate some of that stigma in some sense, but it's still there. And I think still plays a role in people's readiness and willingness to kind of engage in finding a solution.
I love that you're taking a community approach, because it can feel very isolating and lonely, but to bring others together to let them know that they are not alone is something very powerful. Y'all have spoken a little bit about this, but are these behaviors connected to the pandemic specifically, or are there other factors that are impacting the student behaviors that you're seeing in the field?
Diana mentioned it before. I think we were starting to see these behaviors and these patterns increase, and then COVID just exploded everything, right? It just completely exacerbated the situation and the struggles, and especially on the anxiety and the depression piece with our kids. So the COVID definitely has helped to shine the light, I think, on the realities of what we face today. I mean, Diana probably has seen that more on the clinical side, I would assume, as well, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, one of the things that I often talk about with folks is this kind of arrested development that happened as a result of COVID, right? So if you talk to any of the teachers, they'll tell you, the fifth graders of today are not the same fifth graders that I had, 10, 15 years ago, right? They
Yes.
developmentally, they're in a different stage. And, there's an explanation for that, right? And, when we go through stressful times and hard times, traumas, we tend to shift all of our energy and focus into being in survival mode. And that's where a lot of our students were living throughout the pandemic. And so now they're playing catch up, right? And so it's up to us as the adults to recognize that that's happening and also make the necessary adjustments for that as well.
Thank you, Diana. Chris, how are you finding that parents are responding to the changes in student behavior post-COVID?
I think from my perspective, there's not a one size fits all approach or response that parents have had. I think some parents have recognized that their students or the children are struggling, and when we've referred or made the suggestion for a referral outside for some professional help outside of the school, they've embraced that and recognized and welcomed it. But there's still an element of denial in some cases as well. And we see patterns, we see student actions and behaviors, and we see what students sometimes say and write in class. And we share this with parents, and there's still a little bit of denial, and it's got to go. I think Diana used the word stigma before. There's still that stigma that's associated with some mental health struggles. So I think some parents are a little bit resistant, but again, it's becoming more and more common, for better or for worse, in our society. So I think there is a better acceptance of the need to provide those supports that their kids need to be successful, not only academically, but socially and emotionally as well.
Thank you, Chris. Diana, how are you finding parents are responding to the changes in student behavior from a clinical standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's been really similar to what Chris said. From a clinical standpoint, by the time they get to me from a clinical standpoint, they've already kind of accepted that this is a challenge. But just like with anything else, there's a level of grief that occurs for families when they're realizing that something's not right with their child. And we all grieve differently, and depending on the family structure and the outlook as it relates to mental health challenges, cultural context really plays a role. It can all really play a role in how willing people are to see what's really happening, but then also to take action to mitigate it. And so that pre-COVID, that was pretty true. And I think post-COVID, it's gotten a little bit easier because like, as we've said, we're seeing mental health challenges pretty across the board with both children and adults, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if we look at just from an empirical standpoint, here in Massachusetts, I'm in Massachusetts, if you look at the amount of people who are in emergency rooms, about 60%, even during the height of COVID, were folks who were there for mental health challenges. And so it's unfortunate in the regard that so many people are struggling, but then it also has helped to alleviate a little bit of that stigma. And I think people are more willing to get the help because they're seeing their neighbor go through it. They're seeing their, teacher's son go through it, or whatever the case may be. So
thank you both so much for your insight. Do y'all have any advice for how educators can assist families to effectively address these student behaviors that you are seeing?
I think from my perspective, it's important for open lines of communication between our schools as educators and our parents. I think it's important to provide our families with any resources that we may be able to provide to them. So this could be a completely new world for them, and whatever resources we could give to them would be helpful. And I think it's important for us to remind them they're not alone. They're not the only one. Their child is not the only one that is struggling in a certain way. And it's however we could stand by their side throughout this journey, because this could be a very stressful process for them. I think that's our responsibility as educators, especially now in 2023.
Thank you, Chris. I just have a quick follow-up question to that. Do you find that parents that are having a little bit of a harder time accepting that their child may need additional support, that they are willing to hear you out and work with you?
I think it's a journey. It's a journey for these families, and it's not going to, some of them aren't going to change their perspectives overnight. But as behaviors become more regular in school, or we can provide them with concrete examples of this happened today, or this was said today, hopefully they become more accepting of the reality, and they recognize that we're here as a resource as well. We're here as a school to support your son or your daughter while they're with us, but they're only with us for 6 or 7 hours a day. So they might need some additional help as well. So again, it's a journey. We're
Yes.
going to walk with them as much as we can, and hopefully, with time, we head down the right path together.
I appreciate that you guys give families the resources they need and are partnering with them to close the gap between home and school. Diana, do you have anything else that you would like to add to Chris's response?
Yeah, no, I think for me, highlighting what Chris said about, having those open lines of communication, right? And, helping families to not feel alone. There are lots of creative ways that I've seen schools be able to do that, from setting up parent groups, workshops, and different things around social emotional learning, right? When you go to something like that and you see there are 5, 6, 7 other families there, coming to get the same information, having similar concerns, it really helps to stave off that anxiety a little bit more. But the other thing is being thoughtful around communication, how often and what the content of the communication is, right? Oftentimes especially when it comes to a child who may be struggling with social emotional issues, when we're communicating with families, it's not necessarily the best news. Every time there's a phone call or an email, it's something negative, right? And so thinking about that on a grander scale, I've really encouraged schools to think about consistent communication that also highlights the great things that happened, right? That class that child was in, that he was able to kind of sit through without interrupting, and, saying that he did well. And, we're hoping to see more of that, not just highlighting the negatives, because I think oftentimes we see that families get a little put off by that, right? And then they get into defensive mode, and we start to hear things, well, that doesn't happen at home, or we're not saying that, or whatever the case may be, right? But so that's important. And then, just maintaining that language of partnership and collaboration, like, we're doing this together. I'm here for you. We're doing this together, versus something's wrong with your child, please figure it out. Those are two different ways of communicating, and it really makes a difference if the language that we're using is in the spirit of partnership and collaboration versus frustration and just really wanting the problem to get fixed. Because it's tough, right, when you have a kiddo who's struggling, who's making a difference in the classroom. So
Yes, I totally agree. So, how are educators themselves doing? Are you observing more mental health issues among teachers and leaders?
Definitely, I would say educators' social emotional health has also been on the decline, right? And I think there's lots of different reasons for that. Chris mentioned earlier that the job of an educator is challenging in and of itself, right? But then, of course, we think about COVID and the impacts of remote learning and having to figure that out on the fly, and also trying to meet markers and milestones for your students. I think educators are under a great deal of pressure these days, and we're seeing that just in the statistics. It's one of the occupations that people are leaving rapidly. And, that was happening pre-COVID, but I think it's happening a lot more now that people are leaving education. They're not lasting very long. And, I think there are lots of different factors related to that. But, a couple of times I've worked with educators specifically at a couple of schools where I was made available as a resource to educators. And we're constantly talking about things like work-life balance and leaving work at work and not going home and doing lesson plans till 10 p.m. But,
Yes.
just so many different things that educators are trying to contend with all simultaneously. And I think it's become very taxing to be an educator. And so, as part of a robust social emotional learning program, a key piece for me is that educator well-being, and focusing in on that, and finding ways to make sure that the educators themselves feel supported, and that they're not just getting things piled on their plates, that, they're working in collaboration and partnership with people who care about their well-being. And really, at the end of the day, if the educators aren't doing well, our students aren't going to be doing well either. So it's a huge piece of the puzzle that we should be paying attention to across the board.
I totally agree. I was a teacher during COVID. I had a second grade class who I love to pieces, but trying to teach 29 students virtually was very difficult. And I realized that I was not taking care of myself, and I lacked a work-life balance because my home became my classroom. I was working 16 to 18-hour days, and I struggled because of it. So I really appreciate the fact that schools are bringing in professionals like yourself as a resource. Chris, what are you seeing?
Yeah, there's a lot of burnout these days. It's areas like social studies, which I'm a certified social studies teacher. We were a dime a dozen at one point. Social studies has become a shortage area. It's just, I think that one example shows that people are leaving the profession. It's a tough job right now. And it is important, as Diana was saying, to continue to preach to educators. We're asking you to do a lot in the classroom. We're asking you to teach your content. We're asking you to make sure you're working social and emotional into your classrooms. We're asking you to do X, Y, and Z every day. It's equally as important that you are taking care of yourself. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of those 29 kids in your second grade classroom.
Yep.
Right? It's become so much more difficult to do that. So that's one of the things that I have tried to preach, that yes, we have a long list of things we still need you to do. We still need to educate the kids in our classrooms, but we need you to take care of yourself. We need you to disconnect at times.
Yes.
It's okay if you don't respond to that parent email over the weekend. That parent email will still be there on Monday morning. The weekend should be your time. 8:00 on a Tuesday night should be your time.
Yes.
We know you pick education, you know that you have to do work at home. You don't, all your work doesn't stay behind in your classroom when you walk out and come back in. It's not what you signed up for. But now more than ever, you need to make time for yourself. You need to make sure that if you have a family, that your family is part of your day-to-day activities.
Yes.
What was that statistic that just came out? That loneliness is the equivalent of like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. You need to make sure you are surrounding yourself with family and friends and going out and exercising and staying off social media, all those things that can help us to feel better. Now more than ever, our teachers need to make sure they're doing all that.
Chris, I love that you are a school leader who emphasizes self-care. It's obvious that you're living that out as a school leader, giving teachers permission to have a work-life balance. It makes a huge difference. It reminds me of when I was a teacher, and I think it was in my 5th year of teaching that I finally decided not to give my phone number out to parents, and I set boundaries about not responding to parent emails after 4:00. Making that small change was very impactful, and it made a huge difference in my personal life. So I really appreciate a leader like yourself who believes in a work-life balance for your teachers and staff.
Your example is perfect, Erin. If I just chime in, look,
Sure.
You said it took you 5 years.
Yeah.
Most teachers don't last 5 years in the classroom anymore.
Yes.
And it's that demanding schedule that some people, well, I need to be available 24/7. And it's not fair to you as an individual that you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself before you can take care of everybody else.
Yes, that is so true. You hit the nail on the head. That actually brings me to my last question for y'all. What are some effective self-care techniques, both for students and for teachers?
Yeah, there are lots of self-care techniques, and it's going to be different for everybody, but there are kind of some general guidelines that I like to just discuss with people around self-care. Which it's a little bit of a buzzword these days, right? We hear self-care a lot. It's on social media. You see people going on elaborate vacations and hashtagging self-care, right? And so that's great. And also just thinking about self-care in a more realistic fashion, right? The first thing is that, self-care really is meant to be a practice versus a self-soothing mechanism, right? So oftentimes people find themselves engaging in self-care when they are burnt out or they're stressed out and they're like, oh, I need to do something to help alleviate this. So they go do whatever that thing is that of their choice, whether it's going to the gym or whatever the case may be, right? But if we think about self-care as being a practice and something that we instill into our daily lives, then we can be a little bit more creative around what that looks like, right? So for me, an example of good self-care is waking up slightly before my children in the morning and being able to have my cup of coffee in silence and having caffeine on board before the house is awake so that everyone else has a great start to the day, including me, right? And so for me, that's a small way that I engage in self-care every day that doesn't really take too much time, right? That's an example. And so, one, self-care is a practice and not something that we do to self-soothe, but then also self-care doesn't have to be huge or elaborate. It can be small things that you do for yourself throughout the day to check in, to self-regulate, and to just be with yourself. And then, there's also that myth that I think is instilled in us sometimes, especially folks who end up in education or even like healthcare, folks who have a very altruistic nature to themselves. Self-care can feel very selfish, right? It can feel like
Yes.
focusing on myself, and it can feel bad, right? And so shifting that mindset set from self-care being selfish to self-care being necessary. That old adage, you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Yes.
It's very cheesy, but it's so true. And so, those are kind of the guidelines that I kind of used when I'm having conversations on self-care with people. But for myself, things like cut that cup of coffee, going to the gym, other self-care things, getting my nails done, those are all, wonderful things that I like to do on a regular basis to keep myself in a good space.
I love that you bring up the point that it's not only necessary, but that it's a practice that you need to have throughout your life. I mean, when you think about educators and specifically thinking about behaviors in the classroom, you are trying to analyze how you can take a proactive approach to ensure that those behaviors, don't occur instead of a reactive. And the same could be applied for self-care, because I see the hashtags and everything as well with, oh, I got a facial today or a massage. So, hashtag self-care. But, that's one every 6 months or a year. That's treating yourself to something that you enjoy or may help you relax. But I really appreciate you making the distinction between the two, that you have to put it into practice, and that it could be something small, like getting your cup of coffee before the house is awake. So I love that. Thank you. Chris?
I can't say it much better than Diana just did. That was a wonderful summary. I would just add that people need to make it a priority. You need to make self-care a priority in your day. If that requires putting time in your phone, in your busy calendar, to make sure you're blocking out time to practice self-care, that's what you have to do. It has to be a priority. And we also need to be comfortable with the fact that it's okay to treat ourselves.
Yes.
It's okay to spend that time making sure that we're in a good place as well. Everything else is out there. Everything else will still be out there. To find that way to still take care of yourself, we'll all be better for it in the end.
Thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts with our listeners today. Do y'all have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys today. This is such a relevant topic to life and education today. And it's a struggle that you're not going to find any school in America not dealing with today. So we talked about communication with families. I think it's important for educators to communicate with each other, to recognize we're not all on our own little island dealing with this, because it may feel like that a lot of the time. We're all facing some similar struggles, and to talk through and get ideas and recognize, as we ended today, the importance of taking care of ourselves. Those are all important pieces of this puzzle.
Diana, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, no, I think we've covered it. I'm really excited that we're able to have these conversations more in an open forum more and more these days. I think that's a huge silver lining to all of the chaos that we've undergone in the last few years. And so, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you, Diana. And thank you, Chris, for taking the time to share your expertise today on our episode of ADAC Answers.
Thanks, Sarah. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. To everyone at home, if you have any follow-up questions you would like to see addressed in a future episode, or if you want to share your thoughts on today's topic, then please submit them to us on social media using the hashtag ADAC Answers. That's right, ADAC and the word answers to let us know. If you would like to hear future ADAC Answers episodes, then please follow, like, and subscribe. And if you're interested in finding out more about our company and the services we offer, please visit us on our website at www.theadac.com. That is THEADAC eadac.com. Thank you so much for listening to our episode today, and we look forward to you tuning in to our next episode. Again, thank you to all of our listeners from the ADAC team. We'll see you next time.